I love football. The BWI Daily Edition, I'm your host, Thomas Reinkard. That part is pretty obvious, but one thing I love more than football is learning about football. And we're all going to learn together today about the transformation of Drew Allar, Penn State's five-star quarterback in the class of 2022, currently in spring football. But we're also going to get to know the position a little bit better today, and we have an expert to help us do that. That is Brad Maendler joining the show, Drew Allar's private quarterback coach, and also, you know, a quarterback coach. So thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for sharing your time with us today.
Thomas, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to connecting and talking about quarterback play and Drew Allar.
So I want to start there because I've met very few private quarterback coaches. So how does one get started in that business, and what's your background as far as where you started and the influences that got you to where you are?
Right. So it was interesting. I started coaching youth football because my son started playing. This was back, 2005, 2006, and we had a kid that was playing quarterback for us. He was a baseball player. He was very talented, but he couldn't throw a spiral, and had issues throwing a spiral. And I played quarterback all through college. I worked really hard at throwing the ball. It always came really natural to me and easy. And I had a hard time helping him, frankly. And, other than being able to throw out a few cues like, hey, just let it roll off your fingers and snap your wrist and those kinds of things, I didn't really have good answers for him. And it just kind of like, it's based on the business that I've been in my entire work career where, it's essentially a performance improvement business with various companies. I've just always been really curious, like, how do you improve performance? How do you get better? So I went down the rabbit hole, and the first guy who could really explain throwing mechanics in terms of biomechanics and physics and those kinds of things was a guy named Darren Slack. And Darren just had a huge impact on me in terms of really understanding the why behind the what. And again, he was the first one who could explain throwing mechanics in terms of biomechanics and physics. And it wasn't, pick the dollar out of the opposite pocket, and it wasn't pull the light chain and all of those old phrases that we've bandied about forever. And what's interesting about Darren is you really learn arm mechanics. Like, I feel like I got a PhD in arm mechanics in terms of how it works, how to diagnose problems, and then how to fix them. And then as I got further into this, the guy who's had the biggest impact on me is a guy named Will Hewlett. He's currently down in Florida, but he's one of the very best private quarterback trainers in the country. And he pulled me aside and opened some doors for me and shed some light on some things that really just sort of changed the way I started thinking about, helping kids throw better. And I met Will during the time that I spent with Darren. And so within that, there was a lot of other people that I met that had an impact on me. But suffice to say, I stumbled into this, okay? Mm-hmm. And I really enjoyed it. I started coaching high school football, and simultaneous to that, I was still doing the private quarterback training, and then had a real job and a family, and so things got very busy in a hurry. Not busy at all. Sleep became optional, but that's kind of how I got into this, and I love it. It is really rewarding. It's a ton of fun, and to see smiles on kids' faces when they can do things better. That's pretty much the ultimate. So that's how I got into it.
You and I are going to get along great. I want to know the why behind the what as well. So I appreciate that very deeply. So let's get into Drew. And Penn State fans want to know more about their five-star quarterback. So what made you want to work with him? I believe it was after his sophomore season when you started working with him, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. I watched his highlight film that he put together. He had a huge playoff game against St. Ed's. He threw for 500 yards as a sophomore, and look, nobody does that to St. Ed's. And I was really intrigued, and I was able to watch his film, and I just saw some things right away that I was like, oh, I can help him with that. We can make him much more compact. We can make him more explosive, and we can do those things with less effort. because he was what I call a high effort thrower, meaning it looked like he was throwing hard every time, whether it was an intermediate pass or a short pass or he was going deep. And so I reached out to his dad. I said, look, I explained who I was, explained some of the things that I saw in his film, and would like to get together with you guys and just see what we can do together. And so we did that. And I have a process that I take new kids through, new quarterbacks through. And part of the goal is to sell change, is to sort of share this vision of what they could be, right? Like, here's where you are now, and here's where you could be. And this is the downside, and this is the upside of not changing, right? And so right away, Drew was hooked. Right away, he could feel the difference. And then as we progress through this process, it's a fascinating sort of journey that I chronicled on that Twitter tweet in that video that you had mentioned before we started getting on the air here.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about that because something in there kind of sparked my curiosity of, I think a lot of Penn State fans, are there's a good section of them that are pretty old school, and there's a lot of football fans in general, I'd say, know about throwing off your back foot is bad. People like me talk about, the traditional mechanics of the position. But you had something in that video that I thought was very interesting. Can you explain the difference between rotational and linear when it comes to the sort of passing and motion for a quarterback?
Sure. Well, linear is this traditional idea of a stride, right? And the stride creates the momentum forward, and then we rotate at the end of that linear move, and the arm comes through and we throw the ball. And the problem with that traditional approach of that long stride is oftentimes it takes the back foot out of the ground. And if you want to be rotationally great, you want to have that back foot connected, and you want to create some pressure through that back hip turn or that foot pivot. I call it stay heavy through the pivot, but it's a power source that's there. And if you tap into it, it feels pretty effortless. And so you fly directly in the face of a traditional belief where we've got to have all this momentum forward and this weight transfer. I still think weight transfer is important, but too many kids are so impatient trying to get the weight on the back foot or on the front foot that they lose this opportunity to really pull energy from what's happening on the backside of their body, the hip, and working through the glute and those kinds of things. And that's the biggest change. And I the kids laugh, but I call it mushy hips. You can rotate at the end of that heavy linear move. That foot comes out of the ground and it feels, the hips will come through, or if you swing the back leg through, the hips will come through, but it's not the same, not even close to being the same as if you're connected, right, with that back leg and pivoting and staying heavy through that pivot. And so the analogy I always use is if you look at a baseball player, throwing a football is much more like hitting a baseball than it is pitching a baseball. So if you can kind of visualize that hitter right now, that back leg staying connected and working through that glute and using that pivot. The baseball people, I think they still call it squash the bug. That's just a superior way to do that. So the way to think about it now is some linear, right? We need some acceleration forward, but much less, and then rotary, right, or rotational very quickly.
Yeah. Who are some NFL quarterbacks that you know or that you think throw this way and have that sort of rotational hip force that generates power versus the more traditional things, for people to get a sense of kind of if they watch highlights on YouTube or something, they can see the difference?
I would say most of them.
Most of them? Okay.
So the thing with the NFL is, right, they don't have the time, and so they don't have the time for a stride. So that's why sometimes you see a little bit more of an abnormal base. Like if you look at Drew Brees' base was pretty big, right? I mean, his feet were spread apart. But that's that whole concept of being rotational with very little forward acceleration and being able to sort of load that hip and aggressively snap turn those hips to create force. So all the NFL guys do it out of necessity because of, all the NFL guys, most of the NFL guys do it out of necessity because they have to get the ball out quickly and they don't have time for a stride.
Yeah, and it makes sense too with how quick, especially in college too, how quick passing games and RPOs and bubble screens and things like that. You have to be able to throw in a split second, so this is obviously a natural progression into that. How long did it take Drew to kind of work through those things for it to become natural for him?
Well, he was a pitcher, right? And so they're used to coming off and down a mound. So he had a long stride. He had an arm path that shot up very hard, very high, and then he would pull down hard on the football, and as a way to as a means to create force. So we had to sort of rewire that whole process, and that's something that I've just spent a lot of time working on, and then helping kids with is how to sort of rewire the body. The way they think about this so that they can think more rotationally versus this sort of long stride. Because look, these kids oftentimes, when they're younger, they're trying to recruit power from somewhere, right? And usually that means big movements, right? They go long stride, they go big arms, and those are real power leaks through the whole chain of throwing the football. And so we're trying to get away from those things. And so Drew, that was probably that in the arm path to rewire and get comfortable doing things differently. That took about 3 months. And then from there, it was just all, proficiency, right? Mm-hmm. Getting more proficient with it, having it become instantaneous, even if the pocket and the drop is not clean, right? Because half the game is played in some sort of movement where they're sliding, coming up, maybe resetting backwards. And so being able to repeat that same kind of sequential process of getting that foot in the ground quickly and being super rotational and aggressive, you got to be able to do it in that instance as well. So I would say, it took them three months to get comfortable with that, with the added change that we made to his arm path. And this is one of my favorite stories about Drew because, if you think about this, we started working together early January of 2020. Yeah. Well, we're right in the middle of the change process in February, and things are starting to improve, and, he's getting more comfortable with it. But March hits, and of course COVID happens. Yeah. Right. And so I give him things to work on at home. And he takes it and runs with it. I'm talking sending me videos every week. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? He eats up everything that I give him, and then he makes it his own. And that's a big part of this whole mechanics process is it can't be me talking to the kids and sharing concepts. They've got to feel it, and they've got to take ownership over it and make it theirs. And he did it at a level that I've not had anybody else do. Super impressive.
So it's fascinating to hear that because that's a common thread I've heard from Penn State has 3 5-stars in the class of 2022. Drew Allar, Dennis Sutton, Nick Singleton. Each of them went into lockdown and improved themselves. They went in with a tenacious appetite for improvement, and they came out, in Dennis Sutton's case, he came out a defensive end going into defensive tackle. So that sort of, I guess, what does that show you about his character and about his work ethic as far as what you've seen from him and other guys you've coached?
Yeah, Drew Allar is what happens when you have great talent paired with an unbelievable work ethic and kind of a chip on his shoulder because, Thomas, if if you've heard the story about him, he didn't start playing quarterback until he was a freshman, and he still had people around town telling him, you should really stick with tight end, defensive end. And I think people doubted the fact that he could be a quarterback. And if Drew, if you're going to doubt him, look out because he's going to double down. He's already got a crazy work ethic and sort of this, this intense focus on getting better. But then if you doubt him, that's an issue.
I love that I think there's a lot of people that feel that, and that they want that to be what their favorite player in the NFL or their favorite player in college feels like, because that's, I think, a lot of people think that themselves. You mentioned something earlier, and I want to come back to this because consistent, repeatable mechanics to me are the most important thing when it comes to the quarterback position. Is that to you where accuracy comes from? And is that something that you saw with Drew change once he was able to kind of change the way he was doing things?
100%. The ball for Drew, when we first started, the ball would sometimes be, we try and get it generally like on the face, chest, shoulder, right in this kind of area. That's where receivers like it and they can do something with it. And out of 10 throws, he might be on the face 5 times. And then from, the other 5 could be pretty much anywhere, right? So the consistency was an issue. That was one of the things that sold him right away, was seeing how much straighter the ball would fly, right? And how much easier it happened when we made these adjustments, right? And so if you think about it, and this is one of those things that a lot of coaches, talking about throwing mechanics can be a lot like talking religion and politics for people. So I don't want to get into that, but there's this idea some coaches teach where they want their quarterback to get up on, hit the top of the circle and get on top of the ball, right? Hit that top of the circle and then pull down. Mm-hmm. And what happens is that when you hit the top of the circle, if you release a little early, let's say the ball comes off early as you're working up to the top of the circle, where do you think the ball is going to go? It's going to sail.
Yep.
Yeah, it's going to sail. If you hit that top of the circle and start to come down and then release, right? Where do you think that ball is going to?
You're describing my throwing motion, so that's exact. Yeah. So it's going to go into the dirt. You're going to throw it at the feet of whoever you're trying to throw it to.
Exactly right, Thomas. You're tapping into the wrong power sources. I'll come over sometime. This fall when I come to a game, we'll sit down and work.
Okay. So, I don't have as much to work with as Drew. I'm only about 5'9" and a half, but I got a good base. I'll say that. I think I got strong legs.
Right. That's awesome. But, generally, if you think about your accuracy window in this kind of move, hit the top of the circle and come down, it's anywhere between literally 3 feet above their head all the way to the ground.
Yeah.
And then when you add the pressure of a game, and you never one-hopping out against anybody who's average. You always one-hop that out or come back or curl route when it's somebody really good and the pressure's on.
Yep.
I'm talking more generally about younger kids. That's one of the examples I always use with the kids. So it's like, okay, we need to be rotationally really effective. We need to stabilize so we can create this sort of whip effect, this easy velocity. And then we need to have an arm path that really works through and to. So I kind of call it through and to. The elbow comes over the shoulder line. It leads, it gets in front of the shoulder, and then the hand is going to work vertically out to the target, right? And so elbow comes through, hand goes to, the hand works sort of to the face or the midline of the body of your receiver. And it makes things really easy. I can be in a bad position with my feet, but if I know how to get that front shoulder closed towards my target, get my elbow through, and really work vertically to the target, I can be as accurate as I need to be. And who's the best at that in the NFL? Aaron Rodgers. The label for this is called extension, right? This idea of working the arm and extending it vertically to the target. Aaron Rodgers is fantastic because he's a freak and he's super athletic, but he has this ability to very quickly, no matter where his feet are, get his front shoulder to the target and then get through vertically.
Yeah, it is something that he does it better and differently than most quarterbacks. But hearing you explain all these things, it makes sense of what's happening. I want to ask you then about a little bit on the field with Drew, and then I want to ask you some other stuff about playing quarterback. When it comes to the offense that Drew was operating with, is it Medina or Medina? Somebody told me it was Medina.
Yeah, it's Medina.
Medina. Okay. The Medina offense, a lot was on his shoulders, especially his senior season. And you can see on film, he is diagnosing things pre and post snap, and he's definitely at a different level than quarterbacks his age from a mental aspect. I know you're not on the staff for Medina, but when you were observing that transition or his evolution at the position, how did that go from talented passer, throwing for 400 yards as a sophomore, to this guy is the offense his senior season?
Yeah. So it's funny. I trained Drew probably 2 to 3 times a week consistently post-COVID, right? So we were doing it, then we went into COVID. We didn't see each other. We were just doing Zoom stuff. And then we started up again, probably, if I remember correctly, like mid-April or something like that. And then once that, it was, again, 2 to 3 times a week. So I'd never seen him play live. All I had ever seen him do was train, right? And so in the back of my mind, I'm always like, wow, is he this good? I want to see him play in between the lines. So Medina's first game his junior year is against Mentor. A great program, and they had a really tough team, and they got a defensive end who's already committed to Notre Dame. But there's those kinds of players, right, on Mentor. So they're playing a really good team. Now it's raining on and off the entire game, and there's this sort of sequence that happens in the first quarter, probably midway through the first quarter, where the rain is literally coming sideways. And the ball's on the left hash, and Drew, they're working some concept out to the field. And the outside receiver, the number 1, runs like a pivot route or a snag route. He goes hard inside, sticks his foot in the ground, and then pivots and goes back outside towards the sideline. The rain is coming from the sideline, right? So from the sideline side. And there's some wind, right? And so, I'm thinking, oh, this will be interesting. He throws a BB right on the face of the receiver. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this kid is better than I thought, because, he'd been doing a lot of great things before that throw, but it's like one of those moments where you're like, oh, this kid is special. Now, when I look at, the head coach there's Larry Laird, and he's been teaching this offense. He's, it's been his baby for a long, long time, and he's really good at it. So they have created, systems to break this down and make this, empty set that they run simple for Drew. But Drew's got this. First of all, he's a grinder. He loves football. This kid is football 24/7, just loves the film part of it, loves to understand the why behind the what. So I think that is, you look at him physically and everybody would say, wow, look at that. But where I think he's special is up here. So he's a grinder. Plus he's got some kind of spatial intelligence thing that over the years I've just observed. Spatial intelligence leads itself to really good anticipation, right? Mm-hmm. Like you see where the space is opening up based on the path of the receiver, based on the leverage or body position of the defenders, and kind of doing that anywhere between 2 and 3 seconds is another thing, right? Yep. Having spatial intelligence and then being able to do it under pressure like that. And so all of these things came together in this junior year. So, that first game I was blown away, and I remember just walking away, and I remember calling Bill Green, who's a beat writer here in Ohio, because he was at the game as well, and saying, Bill, I think he's way better than I thought he was initially. He's like, I agree, Brad, if you know Bill at all. And then crazy, but his senior year, he got better. In fact, much better. And the consistency of his ball was tremendous. Junior year, you'd still see some moments where he would revert back to some of the things that he used to do. Yep. Man, you didn't see that at all as a senior. He was so consistent, and he was like a jugs machine. It was just out. Perfect speed, perfect ball placement, spin. Pretty impressive.
That was my favorite part of watching his evolution, was seeing exactly what you just said. Every once in a while, you'd see something that you didn't like, but he would always come back and fix it. There was always, even during the junior season, you could see the improvement over time. And then his senior season, just the ability to put all of it together. I'm typically, when I evaluate quarterbacks, I say the hype isn't real just because it can't be. Like the 5-star hype is just so insane.
Yeah.
But he backed it up his senior season, and he became all of that and more, and it's a very impressive transformation. So I appreciate you giving us some insight into that. I want to ask you, though, about his current coach right now in Mike Yurcich. What is your sense of him as far as a quarterback developer and as far as teaching fundamentals of the position, kind of, aside from the tactics, which I know is a big part of his job as well? What's your view of him as a quarterback developer?
Yeah, I'm impressed with Mike. And it was really cool because last summer when the Allars visited Penn State, I went along. Of course I did, right? I'm a football fanatic, and I was going to do that. But got a chance to sit in the QB room at Penn State, right? So Cliff was in there, and Valou and so on. And watching him run a room was really impressive, but I loved the additional piece. So in this example, they were working through protections and how are you going to get yourself protected? And Mike has this way of turning up the energy in the room with voice inflection. And it was pretty impressive. So not only were they working great stuff, and not only was he forcing them to think through, okay, how am I going to get myself protected in this situation? He just amplified the tension in the room through his voice. And I just thought, man, that was really good because that's real football. That, football happens in a very short, quick burst of time. There's a lot of things going on, especially at this level where the speed of the game is so great. And I just thought that was really impressive. The other side of Mike that I think is super impressive is he's hungry to get better. I've been working in professional development my entire work career. Worked with large, Fortune 500 companies to help their sales forces do that. And sometimes when people are really good, they get to a point where they stop learning, right? They've arrived, they stop learning, they stop getting better. And generally that comes back to bite them in some way. And my interactions with Mike are awesome because he's super hungry to learn these new approaches to throwing the football and doing things. And I just think he's a star in the business, and I think he's just going to continue to go up.
You've described my biggest problem with people that are, and not to take shots at anybody, but people that are on TV that do, especially I think color commentary of like, well, back when I played football, and it's like, that was 40 years ago. Like, we need to learn some new things. So I appreciate the insight into that. So when it comes to then,
I'll say this.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Tom, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I have felt like at times I've had this whole quarterback mechanics things figured out probably 15 times. And yet I learned something else and I learned something else. And there's a lot of that in this, you know what I mean? There's this, there's a little bit of trial and error. There's a plot, there's the way you communicate it. There's the way that you make sure that you have this ability to understand the ripple effect of what you're doing. So whenever you try and compartmentalize something for a quarterback, like let's say you're trying to speed the arm up and you focus on one aspect, well, there's always a ripple effect down the chain of what you're trying to change. So anyway, not to go into that part, but that's the big challenge. And so frankly, if you don't know what you're doing, you can screw kids up. And I think that's why there's a lot of coaches who college and the NFL, they can't work with their quarterbacks in the offseason because of the rules, right?
Right.
And so if you have just a little bit of time and you're trying to introduce something new to someone who's already pretty good, there's some risk in that. And I can see why coaches don't do this. They're scheme experts, right?
Yep.
They focus on scheme. They focus on being at the launch point where you're supposed to be, how to process and make decisions. That's what they're great at.
Yep.
So,
and that's exactly what I was curious about, because you see the biggest difference to me between a schematic offensive coach, especially a quarterback coach, either in the NFL or in college, or a guy that's a quarterback developer, is the quarterback fundamentally improves. And whether or not it's with somebody like you or somebody in that ecosystem, they understand the position and how to make it better and how to get the resources to make that position better. And that's, I think,
Right.
a critical thing when you're finding success at the higher levels is finding a guy that can do that or that knows the process to get there. And I think Penn State fans are excited to hear that Mike Yurcich at least gets your stamp of approval.
Oh, I will say this, and again, this is my own transformation. I mentioned it at the start, which, I went deep, and I always go deep. That's just the way that I am. But there was a point where I was maybe sharing too much information, right, and trying to communicate too many things. And there's just a point where you can't. And so what I really respect and what I value is people who can take complex things and make them very simple.
Yeah.
And in the experiences that I've had with all of these Power 5 coaches and the NFL coaches that I had a lot of exposure to during the QB Collective event that we talked about earlier, is this their ability to boil these things down in very simple terms, right? And that to me is impressive because that's something, an 18-year-old, 19, 20, that's something that these kids can get their arms around.
Yeah.
Too much clouds up the thought processes, and that's not good because then kids start overthinking and they don't let the talent just flow. So.
We're speaking with Brad Maendler, quarterback coach for Drew Allar. We're talking about everything from the position down to Drew's transformation to what he is as a player. One thing I want to ask you, again, not to go into too much detail to give the secret sauce away, I tend to focus, and this is something I'm trying to learn, is instead of what happened or what's happening, what's coming next. So is there something that you see in the evolution of the play of the position that you've got your eye on as far as the next evolution of the quarterback?
Yeah. I should know the name of this company, and I'll get it for you. But we met them during this QB Collective camp, the preview that was run like last late April, about this time in Indianapolis, and what they were doing was assessing for cognitive processing speed. This is not intelligence. This is not the Wonderlic. This was about pure ability to, under rapid fire, process information and make quick decisions. And so I think what you're going to see is a lot of this effort to identify it and then figure out, how do we speed it up? How do we make it more clear so that in a game where things are flying so fast and the athletes are so great, quarterbacks, can see and anticipate better, because nobody wants to be watching their favorite team on Sundays and seeing interceptions, right? All they want to see is pass completions and those kinds of things. And I think that's the next big evolution in the game is that part right there.
This conversation, just so you know, Brad, this conversation is everything I wanted it to be, because my least
Awesome.
favorite thing is the it factor. And what you just described there to me is how I've described the it factor. How do you process information quickly and deliver with adrenaline in your system? How do you make sure you are making those quick decisions as if you aren't under pressure? So we're demystifying the it factor, which is one of the reasons 100%. I started doing this, because I was always like, that sounds like BS. It sounds like somebody just didn't know, so they said it. One last thing. I want to ask you about another quarterback you've been working with, Ryan Montgomery, 2025 quarterback from Findlay. Penn State, another prospect who's actually you both were just up here this past weekend, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So give us some insight into Ryan, what sort of passer he is, and what you see his arc as in his development.
Yeah. Well, the exciting thing about Ryan is when I first met him in January of 2020, another one, he was probably basketball first, football second. Not probably, he was. He's a very good basketball player, very good. And just recently, I've seen that football has become his main thing. Like, this is what I'm doing. This is where I'm going. And so a hard worker. I met a hard worker. The intensity and focus now with his work has jumped up a notch. Like, he is wanting to understand the why behind the what, same way that Drew Allar had this intense curiosity about these things. So one, I'm excited about that because I think his development now is going to take off because he loves the work, and he's very talented, man. He is a just under 6'3" right now. He's right about 200 pounds, but his frame looks awesome. The Montgomerys are big people.
Oh yeah, his brother's a lineman.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, is he gonna outgrow the position?
No, I don't think he's gonna. He's a different body type.
Gotcha.
I asked his dad that when I first met him, but Mike said no, different body type, and obviously I agree with that. But he is going to end up being 6'4", 6'5", a good 215, 220, very athletic, great arm talent, can make all the throws, can throw with touch, can put the ball between people. He has this ability, like the great ones do, to take coaching feedback and literally put it into the next throw. So he's a joy to coach because he wants it bad, and he will put it into play like right away. And so we're sort of tweaking his backswing right now, or his take back. It over the season, it got a little bit long. And it would not only get long, but it would end up kind of coming behind his body. And so we're just trying to clean that up. And whatever we do, he just jumps on it right away, and he can feel the difference. And I get really good, insightful questions like, Coach, what about this? Because I'm feeling this. And I'm like, this is a 15-year-old kid who's doing this. There's times where, because it's got to be like we're partners in this, and I'm asking you questions and you're asking me questions. And that's, again, as far as a strength or an attribute, it's these gray matter things, right? Where you've got a kid, to me, his gray matter thing is not only in his ability to like process what I'm telling him or what his coaches at Findlay are telling him, and they have a great staff over there, but it's to then convert it quickly into action. And one of the attributes in adjacent to that is just this poise that he has. So when you meet Ryan, he's not this type A gregarious, although he's really, his brother is like the life of the party. What a big personality, always got a smile, always laughing. Ryan's not like that, but he is really like come on in that department, because when I see him do interviews now, I'm super impressed with how he carries himself and communicates. But it's this poise. And the first game I saw him play was probably the second or third game that he started during the season. They were playing St. John's Jesuit. And another game where it was raining. There's a rivalry there between Findlay and St. John's Jesuit, and the Edge guys were getting after it for St. John's. They were, coming after him. And, we work a lot on off-platform, off-schedule throws because it's half of the game, right? And and how do you maintain control when you're sliding and finding, you're just trying to find time and room to throw the football, right? And he had this one play where he, got through to the top of his drop. He was getting immediate pressure through A gap and from his left. And he just very casually kept his base, slid up and over to get, a slot to throw the football, and threw a beautiful ball over a defender, but in front of another defender who was coming over the top, right on the face of the receiver. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this kid is big time. Because you're not going to see your average freshman in one of his first starts against a really quality program make a throw like that. That was pretty impressive.
Brad
So
Maendler.
it's this unusual poise. Sorry.
No, that's it's super insightful to hear these things. Penn State fans are already probably salivating about getting him on campus again, and he was just here. So I think that's something to look forward to, especially for me watching his film later on in the process. I don't usually dip into 2025 guys or guys that are 2 years out because there's 1,000 of them that I have to watch in 23 right now. But I am very excited after hearing that to check Ryan out. Anything else? I always want to make sure that there's anything else you wanted to discuss or bring up before we get out of here today.
No, I just appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about Drew and Ryan and quarterback play, and think you guys do a great job. So.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for coming on the show and making all of us smarter. This has been a delight. That is Brad Maendler, quarterback coach in Ohio, with Drew Allar and Ryan Montgomery. Keep on calling him Ryan Findlay, but he's from Findlay. Ryan Montgomery. So thank you so much for coming on the show. That'll do it today for the BWI Daily Edition. Make sure you come back on Monday because we're going to be breaking down everything from Penn State football over the weekend. The show never stops here on the BWI Daily.